Economics and emerging markets. This chapter introduces different economic systems and their effect on international business. It explains each type of economic system, economic development, how nations are classified, and how countries implement market-based economic reforms. This chapter objectives are to describe what is meant by a centrally planned economy and explain why its use is declining. Identify the main characteristic of a mixed economy and explain the emphasis on privatization. Explain how a market economy functions and identify its distinguishing features. Describe the different ways to measure a nation's level of development. Discuss the process of economic transition and identify the obstacle for business. Economic systems. An economic system is the structure and processes a country uses to allocate its resources and conduct its commercial activities. No economy reflects a completely individual or group orientation, but displays a blend of individual and group values. We can arrange national economies on a horizontal scale based on their tendency toward individualist or collectivist economic values. We see the hardline communist nations of Cuba and North Korea on the far left of the diagram and see the United States on the far right. Centrally planned economy. In a centrally planned economy, land, factories, and other economic resources are owned by the government, which plans nearly all economic activity. The ultimate goal is to achieve political, social, and economic objectives through complete control of production and distribution of resources. Origins of the centrally planned economy. Central planning is rooted in the ideology that the group's welfare is more important than individual well-being, and thus strives to achieve economic and social equality. Karl Marx in the 1800s argued the economy must be overthrown and replaced with an equitable communist system. By the 1970s, central planning was found in Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Decline of central planning. In the late 1980s, nations dismantled central planning in favor of market-based economics for several reasons. Failure to create economic value. Central planners failed to produce quality products efficiently. Failure to provide incentives. Government ownership limited incentives to maximize benefits from resources, which lowered economic growth and living standards. Failure to achieve rapid growth. Leaders realized the nation were falling quickly behind other nations, and failure to satisfy consumer needs. Consumers' basic needs were not being met. Emerging market focus. The case of China. China's theme is socialism with Chinese characteristics, and the nation has undergone great economic reform over the past 2 decades. In 1949, communes planned all agricultural and industrial production and schedules. Rural families owned their homes and land and produced particular crops. In 1979, government reforms allowed families to grow crops they choose and sell produce at market prices. In 1984, township and village enterprises, TVEs, obtained materials, labor, and capital on open market and used a private distribution system. TVEs laid the groundwork for a market economy. In the mid-1980s, foreign companies were allowed to form joint ventures with Chinese partners. Challenges ahead for China. Political and social problems loom. There are skirmishes between secular and Muslim Chinese, and democracy is restricted. Unemployment, slow economic progress in rural areas, and misery of migrant workers. China as one country, two-system policies must preserve order, as Taiwan is watching closely. Mixed economy. In a mixed economy, land, factories, and other economic resources are more equally split between private and government ownership. Government-controlled economic sectors important to national security and long-term stability. Generous welfare systems support unemployed and provides healthcare. Origin of the mixed economy. Successful economy must be efficient and innovative, but also protect society. Goals are low unemployment, low poverty, steady economic growth, and equitable distribution of wealth. Mixed economies are modernizing to be more competitive. Decline of mixed economies. Many mixed economies are converting to market-based systems. Government ownership means less efficiency, innovation, responsibility, and accountability. Higher cost, slower growth, and higher taxes and prices. Move toward privatization. Privatization involves selling government-owned economic resources to private companies and individuals. It increases efficiency, cuts subsidies to state-owned firms, curtails appointment of managers for political reasons. Try to answer this question for a small recall. Which of the following terms describe an economy in which government and private parties share ownership of economic resources rather evenly? The correct answer is C, mixed. A mixed economy is one in which government and private parties share ownership of economic resources rather evenly. Market economy. In a market economy, most land, factories, and other economic resources are privately owned either by individuals or businesses. The price mechanism determines the supply, which is the quantity of a good or service that producers are willing to provide at a specific selling price. Also the demand, which is the quantity of a good or service that buyers are willing to purchase at a specific selling price. Market economy is rooted in the belief that individual concerns are above group concerns. According to this view, the group benefits when individuals receive incentives and rewards to act in a certain ways. Market economies are grounded on the principle of laissez-faire economics, which is French for allow them to do without interference. Individualism fosters democracy as well as market economy. The three key features of a market economy are free choice. The individuals have purchase options. Free enterprise. Companies can decide what to produce and which markets to compete in. Price flexibility. Prices rise or fall, reflecting supply and demand. Government's role in a market economy. Government has little direct involvement, but plays four main roles in a market economy. Enforce antitrust laws, preserve property rights, provide fiscal and monetary stability, and preserve political stability. Let's look at each of these a bit more closely. In a market economy, government is to enforce antitrust laws. This encourages the development of industries with as many competing businesses as the market will sustain. By enforcing antitrust laws, governments prevent trade restraining monopolies and combinations that exploit consumers and constrain commerce. Governments in market economies are also supposed to preserve property rights. By preserving property rights, governments encourage individuals and firms to take risks such as technology investments, new product invention. Governments legally safeguard claims to assets and future incomes these technologies generate. The government in a market economy is to provide a stable fiscal and monetary environment. This is achieved by influencing inflation and unemployment rates through effective fiscal and monetary policies. Stability improves company forecast and reduces risk associated with future investments. Finally, government in a market economy is to preserve political stability. Market economy depends on a stable government. Political stability helps companies avoid worrying about political risk. Now take a few seconds and try to answer this question. What are the 3 required features and 4 expected roles of government in any market economy? A good answer should be similar to this one. The 3 key features of a market economy are free choice, free enterprise, and price flexibility. The 4 roles of government in a market economy are to enforce antitrust laws, preserve property rights, provide fiscal and monetary stability, and preserve political stability. Economic freedom and wealth. The connection between political freedom and economic growth is very uncertain. But as this graph shows, greater economic freedom tends to coincide with higher living standards. Development of nations. Economic development is the measure for gauging the economic well-being of one nation's people as compared with that of another nation's people. It reflects economic output, agricultural and industrial, infrastructure, power and transportation facilities, physical health and level of education, and cultural, political, legal, and economic differences. National production. One can classify countries by gross national product per capita, but there are problems using GNP and GDP as indicators of development. First, they overlook certain transactions, including volunteer work, household work, illegal or underground deals, and unreported cash transactions. Shadow economy can be so large and prosperous that official statistics are meaningless. Barter is an alternative for buyers who lack hard currency to pay for imports. Second, the question of growth. GNP and GDP are a snapshot of 1 year's economic output and do not indicate whether an economy is growing. Third, the problem of averages. Per capita figures are averages. Urban areas can be more developed than rural areas and have higher per capita income. And fourth, the pitfalls of comparison. To compare gross product per capita, each currency must be translated into a single currency. Official exchange rates do not show what the local currency can buy in its home country. To correct for the inability to compare purchasing power across countries, we turn to another measure of economic development called purchasing power parity. Purchasing power is the value of goods and services that can be purchased with 1 unit of a country's currency. Purchasing power parity is the relative ability of 2 countries' currencies to buy the same basket of goods in those 2 countries. We use purchasing power parity to compare the wealth of nations. If we convert Swiss francs to dollars at official exchange rates, we estimate Switzerland's GDP per capita at $47,900. This is higher than the official GDP per capita of the United States at $39,700. But when we adjust Switzerland's GDP per capita for PPP, we obtain a revised GDP per capita of just $34,700. Which is lower than the US GDP figure of $39,700. Why the difference? GDP per capita at PPP is lower in Switzerland because of that nation's higher cost of living. It simply costs more to buy the same basket of goods in Switzerland than it does in the United States. The opposite situation occurs in the case of the Czech Republic. Because the cost of living there is lower than the United States, the Czech Republic's GDP per capita rises from $10,600 to $18,600 when PPP is considered. Human Development Index. The Human Development Index, HDI, measures the extent to which a people's needs are satisfied and the degree to which these needs are addressed equally across a nation's entire population. Three dimensions of the Human Development Index are a long and healthy life, an education, and a decent standard of living. There often is a disparity between wealth and HDI. HDI demonstrates that high national income alone does not guarantee human progress. Classifying countries. Classifications are normally based on indicators such as GNP per capita, portion of the economy devoted to agriculture, amount of exports in the form of industrial goods, and overall economic structure. Developed countries. Developed countries are highly industrialized, highly efficient, and whose people enjoy a high quality of life. People receive the finest health care and benefit from the best educational systems in the world. Examples are Australia, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, the United States, all Western European nations, and Greece. Emerging market. Emerging markets are newly industrialized countries, plus those with potential to be newly industrialized. Newly industrialized countries, NICs. NICs have recently increased the portion of national production and exports derived from industrial operations. NICs are located mainly in Asia and Latin America, for example Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Brazil, China, India, Malaysia, Mexico, South Africa, and Thailand. Combining NICs with those having potential to become a NIC forms a category called emerging markets. Developing countries. Developing countries have poor infrastructure and extremely low personal income. They rely on one or a few sectors of production: agriculture, mineral mining, or oil drilling. They often lack resources and skills. They are mainly in Africa, the Middle East, and the poorest nation in Eastern Europe and Asia. Developing countries are often characterized by technological dualism, which is the use of the latest technologies in some sectors of the economy, coupled with the use of outdated technologies in other sectors. Choose the correct answer to this question. The correct answer is C. Purchasing power parity is the relative ability of two countries' currencies to buy the same basket of goods in those two countries. Economic transition. Economic transition involves changing a nation's fundamental economic organization and creating new free market institutions. It typically involves several reforms, like stabilize the economy, reduce budget deficits, and expand credit availability, allow prices to reflect supply and demand, legalize private business, sell state-owned firms, and support property rights, reduce barriers to trade and investment, and allow currency convertibility. Obstacles to transition. Countries undergoing transition still can face several main obstacles. First is the lack of managerial expertise. Central planners had little need for management skills, including production, distribution, pricing, and marketing strategies, investigating consumer wants and needs, and conducting research, competitively pricing products, or advertising. Yet the gap in education and experience between managers from the former communist nations and others has narrowed. Second is a shortage of capital. Transition is expensive, requiring spending to develop a telecommunications and infrastructure system, including highways, bridges, rail networks, and subways. Set up financial institutions, including stock markets and a banking system, and educate people in the ways of market economics. Third are cultural changes. Transition causes cultural change and replaces dependence on the government with greater emphasis on individuals. Often are cuts in welfare, unemployment benefits, and guaranteed government jobs. Fourth is environmental degradation. Economic and social policies of former communist governments in Central and Eastern Europe were disastrous for the natural environment. Environmental destruction is evident in increased level of sickness and disease, which cause lower productivity in the workplace. Emerging market focus. The case of Russia. Russia's experience with communism began in 1917. For 75 years, government controlled all aspects of production and distribution, including prices of labor, capital, and products. A rough transition. In the 1980s, Russia entered a new era of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and economic restructuring. Except for criminals and the wealthy, people have difficulty maintaining their standard of living and buying necessities. Some Russians survive because they were factory managers under the old system and retained their jobs. Others have turned to the black market or organized crime. Several challenges lie ahead for Russia. First, managers must improve skills in every facet of management practice, including financial control, research and development, employee hiring and training, marketing, and pricing. Second, political instability and nationalism need to be better controlled, and the nation's nuclear weapons need to be secured. Third, instability characterizes relations between the government and business. The imprisonment of some well-known business leaders illustrates why the Russian government is not trusted. Now take a few seconds and think about how to answer this question. What is economic transition, and what are the remaining obstacles in post-communist countries? If your answer is similar to this one, you've done a good job. Economic transition involves changing a nation's fundamental economic organization and creating new free market institutions. Essentially, it involves stabilizing the economy, reducing budget deficits, and expanding credit availability, allowing prices to reflect supply and demand, legalizing private business, selling state-owned companies, and supporting property rights, reducing barriers to trade and investment, and allowing currencies convertibility. Remaining obstacles in transition countries include a lack of managerial expertise, a shortage of capital, cultural changes, and environmental degradation. Ongoing market reforms in formerly centrally planned and mixed economies have a profound effect on international business. Free markets are spurring major shifts in manufacturing activity. Lured by low wages and growing markets, international companies are forging ties in newly industrialized countries and exploring opportunities in developing nations. Global capital markets make it easier to set up factories abroad, and some newly industrialized countries produce world-class competitors of their own.